Chapter 61. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Check out Charlotte in action. The Red Earl smirked, took a small step back, positioning himself behind his umbrella. He reached down and yanked the umbrella free from the sand. "Alright, show me what you've got," that he barely got the words out before Charlotte charged, clang. Charlotte's sword, crackling with hockey, slammed against the Red Earl's hockey-infused umbrella. The Red Earl unleashed a flurry of attacks, creating a whirlwind of sword light. His umbrella became a blur in front of Charlotte. Charlotte squinted. His movements were too fast for her eyes alone. Time for observation hockey. Using his hockey, he could now see the Red Earl's swordsmanship clearly in his mind's eye. He countered, blocking the relentless umbrella strikes. Clang. Clang clang. Clang, clang, clang. Their weapons clashed repeatedly, hockey sparking with each blow. "Nice swordsmanship," Charlotte said, blocking another strike. The Red Earl's style was unorthodox and rapid, his movements erratic, focused on speed, precision, and deadliness. He seemed to be targeting weak points. It was a style Charlotte had never encountered before. Initially, she was struggling to keep up, but once she understood the rhythm, it became easier. "Yours ain't bad either," the Red Earl retorted, his eyes burning with intensity. After years of honing his swordsmanship, he'd finally found someone who could match his speed. What's more, Charlotte's style emphasized power, a direct contrast to his finesse, allowing him to learn and adapt during the fight. Clang. After another strike, Charlotte deliberately created some distance between them. Close combat with the Red Earl had put her at a disadvantage. Ground shatter. Charlotte unleashed a powerful wave of energy towards the ground, aimed directly at the Red Earl. Instead of dodging, the Red Earl countered with a sword wave of his own, creating a massive explosion as the two attacks collided. The force of the blast created a crater at the point of impact. "Great swordsman," Cyborg Sora, who had been watching the battle, exclaimed. Warring States, looking at the screen, analyzed the situation calmly. "Two great swordsmen. Charlotte must have leveled up after fighting Zifa. She's definitely reached great swordsman status now." Warring States didn't overreact like Cyborg Kong, but maintained a measured tone. Bang. "Damn it. Where did this monster come from?" The thought of another powerful pirate like Charlotte appearing on the scene infuriated Steelbone Kong. Just then, General Crane approached with a file. "We've identified the Red Earl. He only became a wanted criminal in the last 2 years. The reason for his bounty is also in here. He killed a corrupt nobleman, and Navy headquarters issued the reward." Admiral Crane handed the information to Steelbone Kong. Cyborg Kong read the file. Bang. "Damn. How could this nobleman be so arrogant?" Steelbone Kong slammed his fist on the table, enraged by the details of the nobleman's crimes. "Are we so out of touch that we're labeling someone like this a pirate?" Warring States added, equally furious. Lieutenant General Crane looked at the two men, helpless. "What's done is done. The Red Earl's bounty has already been issued. There's no way to retract it now. The world government won't withdraw it just to save face for the Navy. We need to focus on how to deal with him." Lieutenant General Crane rubbed his temples. "Exactly. Lieutenant General Crane is right. We need to think about how to handle the Red Earl. Seeing him with Charlotte, maybe he's thinking of joining the Rocks Pirates. We need to deal with him before this becomes a bigger problem." Sengoku looked at Cyborg Kong, urging him to act. Steelbone Kong felt a headache coming on. The Navy headquarters simply didn't have the resources to spare to deal with the Red Earl. They couldn't take him down with a small force. He could personally intervene, but as the fleet admiral, he couldn't leave Marineford lightly. The last time he dispatched all available forces, the 5 elders nearly blew a gasket. Therefore, he couldn't leave the Navy headquarters unless absolutely necessary. Sending Warring States alone was risky, as he wasn't confident that Warring States could defeat the Red Earl quickly enough, and with Charlotte nearby, Warring States might be ambushed. That was unacceptable. If word got out, it would undermine the Navy's authority and embolden more pirates. So, sending Warring States alone was out of the question. But when it came to Charlotte and the Red Earl, the Navy headquarters simply didn't have enough troops. He realized, with growing urgency, that the Navy needed to expand its forces. Let's discuss this again later. The Navy headquarters can't spare any troops to encircle Charlotte and the Red Earl right now. We'll have to wait and see. Cyborg Kong concluded. Sengoku and Crane nodded in agreement. They understood the limitations of the Navy headquarters, meanwhile, on the deserted island. Taking it head-on. I like this. Charlotte smirked as he watched the Red Earl brace for impact. He preferred opponents who could withstand his power. After all, raw power was his specialty, not swordsmanship. Charlotte swung his sword rapidly, surrounding the Red Earl's retreat with white energy. In an instant, Charlotte unleashed a dozen slashes worthy of a great swordsman. Each attack was infused with Charlotte's will. The Red Earl flinched at the sight of so much energy. He'd never seen anyone swing so casually and effortlessly. He'd never seen so much raw power channeled through a sword. Take it head-on. Only a fool would do that now. The Red Earl quickly fired off 2 blood-red sword auras, knocking down several of Charlotte's attacks. He dodged the remaining slashes with swift, fluid movements. Then, he closed the distance between them. He knew he had to engage Charlotte in close combat, otherwise, Charlotte's raw power would eventually wear him down. What a monster, that the Red Earl thought, recalling how Charlotte unleashed a dozen great swordsman slashes without breaking a sweat. How much stamina did he have? Seeing the Red Earl charge forward, Charlotte met him head-on. He swung his sword towards the Red Earl's chest. Clang! The Red Earl blocked the attack with his umbrella, allowing him to understand Charlotte's fighting style and become more efficient. His speed was unmatched, gaining the upper hand in the close-quarters battle. Chapter 62. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing the Red Earl's swordsmanship getting faster and faster, Charlotte started to sweat. The Red Earl's attacks were just too damn tricky, targeting her weakest points. It was really starting to piss her off. Plus, every time the Red Earl's umbrella slammed against her sword, she could feel it weakening, like it was about to give way. Don't you dare break! She cursed inwardly. Hold together. Hold together, that she prayed silently, layering more and more armament hockey onto the blade. Clang. Charlotte parried the Red Earl's sideways attack with her sword, but then, a sharp crack echoed. Snap. Charlotte's sword snapped in two. Seeing the broken blade, the Red Earl quickly pulled back his umbrella, taking a step back to examine Charlotte. Isn't that a famous sword you're carrying? The Red Earl frowned, questioning her choice of weapon. Charlotte glanced at the broken long sword in her hand and shook her head. Nah, just a regular long sword. So, where's your fancy sword? The Red Earl clearly didn't buy it. He couldn't believe a big-shot pirate with a 500 million belly bounty didn't own a single famous sword. Famous sword? I ain't got one of those, Charlotte declared confidently, though a little ashamed. A top-tier swordsman without a famous sword? It was kinda embarrassing. What about a black blade? The Red Earl pressed. His umbrella was reinforced with armament hockey, after all. Black blade? I've tried, but with all the battles in the New World, none of them have worked out. Charlotte gave a wry smile. After hearing Charlotte's explanation, the Red Earl fell silent and lowered his umbrella. If you don't have a proper sword, continuing this match would just be bullying you. We'll finish this when you've got a real blade, the Red Earl stated simply, a hint of dissatisfaction in his voice. Charlotte immediately bristled at the insinuation. Hold on. You think you're bullying me? Where do you get off saying that? And who says a broken sword is useless? Come on. Let's go again. Hearing the Red Earl's insulting words, Charlotte instantly snapped. Wells, recording everything with the Den Mushy, captured the scene. Cyborg Kong felt a twinge of regret watching. Though they were pirates, these two were also among the few truly great swordsmen in the world. Seeing them clash was rare, but now the match was cut short by a broken sword. Kong sighed in disappointment. Others shared his sentiment. While the Navy HQ had plenty of strong physical fighters, skilled swordsmen were few and far between, and a great swordsman was non-existent. Witnessing two masters duel was a huge boon for swordsmen and trainees alike. Maybe someone would even pick up a trick or two from the fight. Discovering a new swordsman talent could significantly boost their combat capabilities. They even considered saving the recording for future Navy recruits to study. Sure, the participants were pirates, but that didn't diminish the learning opportunity. Back on the deserted island, the Red Earl frowned at Charlotte. He didn't take her words to heart. In his eyes, a swordsman without a sword was no swordsman at all, not even a so-called great one. Seeing the Red Earl's indifferent gaze, Charlotte's anger flared. "I'll show you my swordsmanship." Charlotte's haki erupted, filling the air. The Red Earl's frown deepened as he sensed the powerful presence. Why was she releasing Conqueror's haki? But then, he was utterly blindsided. Blood sword, Batian. Charlotte infused her broken sword with haki, instantly turning the shards blood red, with crimson lightning crackling around them. "You better watch out." Charlotte focused her haki around the broken blade, unleashing a devastating flying slash. This was a technique Charlotte had adapted from Kaido's Thunderbugwa, a devastating finisher perfect for her style. The Red Earl was taken aback by the sheer force of the attack. He felt a genuine threat to his life, a sensation he hadn't experienced in ages. Instantly, the Red Earl's blood began to pump with excitement. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. A brush with death. The Red Earl stared intently at the blood-red slash, remaining motionless as the attack hurtled closer. Earl's sword. The Red Earl met the haki-infused slash head-on with his umbrella. Clang. A deafening boom echoed. Bang. The force of the impact sent the Red Earl flying, slamming him into the beach a good 30 feet away. He immediately sprang back to his feet and returned to face Charlotte. Gah! The Red Earl stood 10 meters from Charlotte, spitting out a mouthful of blood as he regained his footing. Ha 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 ha. Got me good. The Red Earl smirked at Charlotte, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth, but then he clutched his chest, wincing in pain. Cough cough cough. What was that technique? The Red Earl clutched his chest, the flower pinned there appearing even more vibrant as it soaked up his blood. But the Red Earl had no time for his flower, fixated on Charlotte with a bewildered expression, sensing the difference from that slash. Seeing the Red Earl's disheveled state, Charlotte burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. Serves him right for looking down on her. But after unleashing that attack, Charlotte's broken sword had completely disintegrated, leaving only the hilt in her hand. Ignoring Charlotte's laughter, the Red Earl stared intently. He desperately wanted to use his mind-reading abilities, but he was drawing a blank when it came to Charlotte. Charlotte's laughter eventually died down. Noticing the Red Earl's inquisitive gaze, she didn't mind sharing her secret. It was something you could only achieve by practicing with the few people in the New World who could control armament haki to a high degree. Charlotte herself had only mastered it after fighting Charlotte Lin, and Charlotte was a genius. After their first fight, she picked it up quickly. Nothing to it. The move I just used is called Conqueror's Haki Infusion. It's an attack that wraps Conqueror's Haki around a weapon. Bet you didn't see that coming, huh? Conqueror's Haki can be used on weapons, Charlotte declared with a boastful tone. Seeing Charlotte's smug expression, the Red Earl didn't want to even make eye contact. He just needed to learn how to do that. But, seeing Charlotte's expression, the Red Earl choked back the words forming on his lips. Observing Charlotte's childish behavior, the Red Earl resolved to seek it out in the New World. He couldn't bring himself to beg this immature person in front of him. What do you say? Wanna learn it? Just ask. I'll gladly teach you. Chapter 63 The Tsundere Red Earl. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Charlotte sidled up to the Red Earl, who was clutching his chest, and purred. The Red Earl's face darkened at Charlotte's words. He waved his hand, brushing Charlotte away. No. I'll learn it myself in the New World. I don't need you to teach me, the Red Earl declared haughtily. Easy peasy. Thing is, there are only 2 people I know who can even use Conqueror's Haki. You sure you can find them? And even if you do, who says they'll teach you? Charlotte wasn't bothered by the Red Earl's rejection, and continued in that same teasing tone. The Red Earl fell silent, a melancholy look crossing his face. Charlotte burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha. The Red Earl glared at Charlotte's smug grin, itching to smack him with his umbrella. Seeing the Red Earl's face getting darker and darker, Charlotte finally shut up. He pulled the training notebook Locks had given him from his pocket, tore out a few pages, and handed them to the Red Earl. "Ryder, this is a guide to Conqueror's Hockey. Give it a read if you're interested. My captain, Locks, wrote it himself. It's super rare, so keep it safe." Charlotte patted the Red Earl on the shoulder. This time, the Red Earl didn't flinch from Charlotte's hand. He stared intently at the writing on the paper. "Honestly, the fastest way to train Conqueror's Hockey is to fight people who already have it. You can only improve in battle." Charlotte looked at the Red Earl earnestly. The Red Earl was taken aback. "Then tell me, who in this world can use Conqueror's Hockey?" he asked eagerly. Charlotte chuckled, seeing the Red Earl's eagerness. "Ha ha 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 ha. Ryder, you're jumping the gun." The Red Earl scowled, not seeing what was so funny. Seeing the Red Earl's dangerous look, Charlotte immediately stopped laughing and pointed at himself. "The guy who can use Conqueror's Hockey is right in front of you. Ha ha ha." Seeing the murderous glint in the Red Earl's eyes, Charlotte couldn't help but laugh again, but when he saw the Red Earl raise his umbrella, he quickly relented. Okay, just kidding." Charlotte waved his hand. His sword was broken, and he didn't want to get hit. In this world, those who can use Conqueror's Hockey have to have Conqueror's Hockey. Wait. Don't get hasty. Charlotte jumped back as a slash tore a small hole where he'd been standing. "Stop talking nonsense, or I won't hold back," the Red Earl said coldly, but there was no real malice in his eyes. "Ha ha ha, just joking, lighten up. Try smiling once in a while." Charlotte laughed. "As far as I know, there are only 7 of us with Conqueror's Hockey in the world. 5 of them are in our Rocks Pirates, and 2 are in the Roger Pirates. That's Rocks D. Gibbeck, Whitebeard Edward Newgate, Golden Lion Shiki, Charlotte Lin, and me. And in the Roger Pirates, you have Roger, and Silvers Rayleigh. Those are the 7 I know for sure. There might be others, but I don't know about them." Charlotte counted them off on his fingers. The Red Earl was stunned to hear that 5 of the 7 with Conqueror's Hockey belonged to the Rocks Pirates, but as he was stunned, he kept thinking, he deserved to be the pirate overlord Rocks. Even in the first half of the Great Voyage, the Red Earl was still familiar with this name. "Okay. I got it. I'll challenge them one by one." The Red Earl was excited to hear that there were so many strong fighters. He felt no fear, only the desire to grow stronger. Charlotte looked at the Red Earl in surprise. "Ryder, are you crazy? You want to challenge pirates one by one? You know they're pirates, right? I'm pretty chill, but they're not all like me. Hey. Relax, will ya? You're picking on someone who's weaponless." Charlotte jumped around, putting his mastery of the Navy's 6 styles to work. None of the slashes came close. The Red Earl's mouth twitched. He thought he was fast, but Charlotte's speed wasn't half bad. Steelbones Kong and Suru, who were sitting in the Navy office, looked at Charlotte in surprise. As Navy officers, they knew the 6 styles. They hadn't expected to see a pirate using them so proficiently. Bang. That damn Charlotte. Sooner or later, we'll get him and impel down. Steelbones Kong growled. For a pirate to flaunt his mastery of the Navy's 6 styles right in front of them was a blatant slap in the face. The Red Earl stopped waving his umbrella. "Ha! Don't get so worked up." Charlotte walked over and clapped the Red Earl on the shoulder again. "If you really want to challenge someone, I recommend the Roger Pirates. They're different from most pirates. They're not as ruthless. You might be surprised." Charlotte thought of the Roger Pirates, of the future Pirate King, Roger. Funny, he'd been in the One Piece world for 7 years and still hadn't met Roger in person. He'd only seen him in the newspapers a few times. "Roger," the Red Earl nodded. "All right. I'll challenge Roger first when I get to the New World." Whoa. I meant to challenge Roger's vice-captain, Silvers Rayleigh. I didn't tell you to go challenge Roger to your death." Charlotte stood beside the Red Earl and yelled. The Red Earl snorted arrogantly. Who I challenge is none of your business. Charlotte was stumped. He guessed it wasn't his business. Ha 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 ha. You're right. Charlotte scratched the back of his head. Seeing Charlotte's reaction, the Red Earl's mood improved. Alright, let's go. Stop standing around. Shall we go to Water 7 to grab a drink? What is there to drink and eat here? Charlotte put his arm around the Red Earl's shoulder and started walking toward the beach. About 100 meters ahead of them, a small boat, a transponder snail, was being held by a Marine Rear Admiral. Oh. Ryder, looks like your bounty's about to go up. Charlotte pointed to Rear Admiral Wells holding a video transponder snail and smirked at the Red Earl. Humph. I don't care about things like that. The Red Earl scoffed disdainfully. Charlotte shrugged. Looks like Bruce and Bruce fainted. Probably when we unleashed our conqueror's hockey. Charlotte looked at the two men lying on the beach, foaming at the mouth. Chapter 64 Competition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. How about a swimming race to the capital of 7 waters? Loser buys the drinks. Charlotte clapped the Red Earl on the shoulder and suggested the capital of 7 waters was a good distance away, but nothing these two couldn't handle. The Red Earl glanced at Blue, still sputtering seawater, and reluctantly agreed. Ha! Alright, on the count of 3, Charlotte, practically bouncing with excitement, didn't wait for an answer. 1, 2, 3, she dove in, streaking towards the city. The Red Earl, forgetting all pretense of composure, tossed his umbrella aside and plunged in after her. Their arms churned like crazy. Bruce, wake up. Snap out of it. Wells rocked his rowboat wildly, suddenly realizing his own boat was out of commission. Seeing Charlotte gaining on the Red Earl, Wells' face darkened. In his office at Navy headquarters, Steel-Bone Sora and Sengoku watched the scene unfold. Wells, abandon ship. Get out of there. Sora shouted into the transponder snail. He wasn't about to watch Major General Wells get taken out. Wells, seemingly oblivious, was still rowing furiously, though the boat was spinning in circles. Come on. Wells wailed, on the verge of tears. The ship just kept turning. Watching Charlotte and the Red Earl get closer, Wells felt the cold grip of death. Splash. Splash, star. Just as Wells squeezed his eyes shut, ready to meet his maker, 2 wakes surged past the boat. After an eternity, Wells cautiously opened his eyes. Hey! I'm not dead. I made it. He patted himself down in disbelief. They didn't kill me. Wells was confused. He hadn't been spotted. Why wouldn't they attack? Back at headquarters, Cyborg Kong breathed a sigh of relief. At least Wells was okay. Bang, star. That damn kid is getting cocky. Doesn't take the Navy seriously at all. Kong refused to believe Charlotte hadn't known Wells was a Navy observer. Ignoring him like that was a blatant insult. Sengoku and he exchanged wry smiles. Meanwhile, the race raged on. They were hauling. Seen from afar, they looked like twin rips in the ocean. Charlotte and the Red Earl were neck and neck, but Charlotte held a slight lead. Though the Red Earl was giving it everything he had, he couldn't close the gap. The Red Earl wondered if Charlotte was playing with him, deliberately holding back. They were flying, covering most of the distance in a blink. Time for the final sprint. Both the Red Earl and Charlotte kicked it into high gear, swimming with every ounce of strength. With their mastery of hockey, they had no fear of losing their way, and if they did, they'd correct course on the fly. Look! What's that in the water? On the beach, people were pointing at the approaching wakes. Looks like 2 people swimming. Someone with sharp eyes exclaimed. No way. Nobody swims that fast. Skeptics scoffed. They're getting closer. Oh my god. It is 2 people swimming. What kind of freaks are they? Within 100 yards, everyone on the shore could see the 2 figures. Splash, in a flash, Charlotte surged ashore. Ha 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 ha. Red Earl, I win. I win. Charlotte was ecstatic, hot on her heels. The Red Earl emerged from the water, looking none too pleased. Drinks. Drinks. Drinks, Charlotte chanted, oblivious to the Red Earl's foul mood. Humph. Fine, let's go. Pick a bar, and I'm buying. The Red Earl was a sore loser, but a loser nonetheless. Ha. You said it. I'm gonna bleed you dry, Charlotte grinned. We'll see who's laughing last, the Red Earl muttered, clearly not ready to concede defeat. Charlotte brushed past the gawking crowd and headed into the capital of Seven Waters. With his keen senses, he had no trouble navigating the city. The Red Earl glanced at the gathering sailors, his expression turning sour. He could feel the darkness in their hearts, including the slave traders plotting to snatch them up and sell them to the celestial dragons. The Red Earl sneered inwardly, knowing this would be easy. He ignored them and followed Charlotte. He also understood something: his hockey hadn't failed. It simply didn't work on Charlotte. This gave him a strange sense of relief and disappointment. He wanted to know what Charlotte was thinking, but he couldn't. Oh, well, the slave traders exchanged glances, understanding, and quietly dispersed. Charlotte led the Red Earl to the heart of the city, a bustling commercial street. Charlotte beamed, loving the atmosphere. The Red Earl, on the other hand, was grimacing. The cacophony of thoughts was overwhelming. Charlotte noticed his discomfort and quickly dragged him toward a tavern. He could smell it, the distinct aroma of rare, high-end liquor. This is the one, Charlotte announced, stopping in front of the bar. The Red Earl looked up at the sign. The Anchor Tavern. He read the name aloud. Let's go. Charlotte kicked open the door. The Red Earl sighed. What had he gotten himself into? Still, he followed. Hey! Give us your best stuff. Money's no object, Charlotte bellowed as soon as they were inside. Chapter 65 Arrest. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Red Earl stumbled as he walked into the bar, almost tripping when he heard Charlotte's words. He glared at her, thinking, I've seen Shameless, but this takes the cake. Ahem, the Red Earl coughed, clearing his throat to remind them he was there. Charlotte turned, grabbed his arm, and led him to a clean table. Ha 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 ha. Ryder, we're totally having a drink-off later. The Red Earl's expression turned disdainful, as if something had just dawned on him. Didn't someone mention they were, 20? He said, sipping his tea. Huh? What's that supposed to mean? Charlotte was puzzled. Ha. Nothing, just saying. Beating a 20-year-old? That's barely even a challenge. The Red Earl sneered, *bang, star. Ryder, stop being such a jerk. Oh wait, weren't you just taken down by a 20-year-old? Charlotte snapped back, feigning innocence, *bang, star. You. The Red Earl slammed his fist on the table, pointing a finger at Charlotte, but then. Ha ha ha, they both burst out laughing, looking at each other. The other patrons were bewildered, *bang, star. Whoosh, star. Just as one drunk was about to yell at them for the commotion, he slammed his fist on the table to yell. The Red Earl and Charlotte drew their weapons in a flash, aiming for the drunk. The Red Earl pulled an umbrella from beside the table, while Charlotte drew a dagger. 2 strikes, one red and one white, attacked the drunk simultaneously. Arg! Charlotte sliced the hand that the drunk was about to raise, while the Red Earl was even more brutal, slashing from the drunk's waist to his chest with the umbrella. Agony ripped through the drunk's body, instantly sobering him up. Scrape, scrape, star. Everyone else scrambled to their feet. The sheer speed of the attack terrified anyone who was about to speak. They swallowed their words. It was clear these were people you didn't mess with. Swish, star. A huge crowd of drinkers stampeded toward the door. Once outside, they started shouting. Murder! They're killing people, the patrons from the tavern yelled as they ran. Curious onlookers peeked inside. They saw a big guy lying in a pool of blood. Whoa! Someone got killed. Even those who just wanted to watch the scene cleared out fast. If they were willing to kill, were they going to take the chance? As more and more people screamed, the whole area emptied out. Charlotte and the Red Earl just grinned at each other. Ha 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 ha, they roared with laughter. Hey, barkeep! Where's the booze? Get it over here, or I'll break your legs. Charlotte shouted at the bartender, her tone harsh and her expression fierce. The bartender cowered behind the bar, afraid to look up, but hearing Charlotte's voice, he steeled himself and carried a tray with 2 bottles of wine. Here you go. Here you go. Why your wine? The bartender trembled, his hands shaking, with a dead body nearby. Ha 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 ha. Charlotte grabbed a bottle and handed it to the Red Earl, then popped open the other. Here's to getting hammered together, because why not? She raised her bottle, clang, star, the Red Earl clinked his bottle against hers, gulp, 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 star, they both tilted their heads back and drained their bottles in one go, smash, star, Charlotte slammed her bottle onto the floor. Yes, she said, grinning, her blonde hair whipped around as she tilted her head back. Bring us everything you've got. Charlotte yelled at the bartender. Why yes. Yes, the bartender was terrified. Charlotte's intensity was overwhelming. He quickly brought out several bottles of their best wine and Charlotte and the Red Earl drank like nothing had happened. Outside, bang, star. What is this I hear? Someone is killing people in broad daylight in Seven Water City. Who gave them the gall? Sheriff. Get over there. The speaker was Mayor Hoyle, the mayor of Seven Water City, and the corrupt backer of various gangs. Yes, sir. The sheriff gathered his deputies and raced toward the scene, but they were too late, or perhaps it was that they heard too slowly. Charlotte and the Red Earl were like 2 kids, locked in a drinking competition. You have a bottle, I have a bottle, nobody was going to let the other win. Got a drink? Drink? Charlotte was red-faced, slumped on the table, clutching a half-empty bottle and slurring. The Red Earl wasn't doing much better, he just kept pouring wine down his throat, in silence. Ha 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 ha. Finished a bottle faster. I won. Ha 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 ha, bang, star. The Red Earl collapsed onto the table with a thud. Ha 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 ha. You passed out. Ha 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 ha. I won again, bang, star. Charlotte also went down. As soon as they were both out cold, the eyes of some people hiding in the back kitchen flickered. They were the same guys who'd seen Charlotte and the Red Earl on the shore earlier. Boss. They're both out of it. How much did they drink? A greasy guy in a tank top clicked his tongue. The boss, with a scorpion tattoo on his face, looked at them expressionlessly. Slap slave collars on them and get them to the auction house. Maybe they'll fetch a good price. The boss took a drag of his cigarette and gave the order. These guys were part of a slave hunting crew that operated near the Seven Water City auction house. You got it, boss. 4 of his henchmen stepped forward toward Charlotte and the Red Earl. The same 4 henchmen cautiously placed the slave collar on Charlotte's neck, their faces lightening up. One of the guys even kicked the Red Earl. Still so tough, huh, dog? This was the same guy the Red Earl had glared at earlier. Hey, Jack. Don't kick him too hard, these are going to be worth a fortune. That's the Red Earl, Patrick Redfield, with a bounty of 100 million. You mess him up, he's worthless. The others pulled the guy back. Humph. I'll let you off this time. But if you don't wind up in the hands of some messed up nobles. Jack spat on the ground. Nobles were all perverts. But whatever, the Red Earl had that noble look, the cold exterior that some of the rich ladies loved. Heh 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 heh. The men dragged the Red Earl and Charlotte toward the auction house. Chapter 66 Slave Trader. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Those 2 are done for, snatched right up by those jackals. He said it after watching 6 or 7 guys hustling fruit nearby nab the 2 who'd just done the killing. Shoo. You got a death wish? You gonna blab in front of them? You trying to get us killed? His buddy slapped a hand over his mouth, terrified the jackals would overhear. Lucky for them, they were only focused on their catch and didn't hear a thing. He breathed a sigh of relief and shot a dirty look at his loud-mouthed friend. If you don't want to get targeted, you better stay out of this. Next thing you know, you'll be getting hauled off and sold as a slave. Besides, those 2 didn't exactly strike me as saints. Decent folks don't just go around offing people. His buddy broke out in a cold sweat and shut his trap. Neither Charlotte nor the Red Earl had a clue they'd been nabbed by slave traders. They were still out cold, looked like they wouldn't be waking up any time soon. 10 minutes after the slave-catching crew cleared out, a squad of sheriffs in uniform stormed the bar. They burst inside, every one of them leveling their guns at the door. "Listen up, you murderers inside. Come out now with your hands on your head and surrender. Cooperate and maybe you'll get leniency. Don't make us come in after you," the chief, who used to work in the mayor's office, yelled through a megaphone, but after all that shouting, only one guy shuffled out with his hands on his head. "Boss! Boss! Don't shoot, don't shoot. I own this place." Those two criminals were just snatched by Kibben's gang, the hotel owner babbled, still clutching his head. The sheriff's face darkened when he heard that. Of course he knew who Kibben was. He was the head of the slave-hunting crew outside the Seven Waters Capital Auction House. He had a whole team working for him and, even worse, the guy in charge of the Seven Waters Capital Auction House was Mayor Hoyle, his direct boss. He was caught between a rock and a hard place. He spun around in place, then he looked at the 20-plus cops standing behind him. "All right, team. Pack it up. Let's head back." "What a mess," the sheriff spat on the ground and led the team back the way they came. He had to report this to the mayor and let him decide what to do next. "Ha ha ha. Manager Fay brought you a couple more goodies. Have a look," Kibben bellowed, waving his hands to signal his crew to haul up the Red Earl and Charlotte. Manager Fay caught a whiff of them as they were brought in, still unconscious. There was a strong smell of booze. Manager Fay gave them a sharp look. "Hey! Just these two? That's not enough. You know, if you don't meet the auction house quota, you're liable to end up on the auction block yourself." Manager Fay looked them up and down, then turned his gaze on Kibben, a gleam in his eye. "Hey! Manager Fay, it ain't over yet. I'm gonna round up at least one more. Gotta make up for it, right?" Kibben sidled up to Manager Fay with a greasy smile and slipped a wad of cash into his pocket. Manager Fay patted the money in his pocket, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. All right. But you better hurry. This one's kinda handsome, he'll fetch a good price. Say 300 million for him. The other one, 80 million. Sound fair? No ripping off kids or old folks here." Manager Fay's voice was like nails on a chalkboard. "Sounds good. Sounds good. Whatever you say, Manager Fay." Kibben rubbed his hands together, greed plastered all over his face. "All right then. Go to the back to get your money." Manager Fay turned and headed into the bowels of the auction house. The place was lined with cages of all sizes, and the animals inside weren't animals at all, but people. They were all vacant-eyed, staring straight ahead, lost in their own worlds. "Put them in these two iron cages, then." Manager Fay pointed to two cages stained with blood. "Yep." Kibben waved his hand, and his guys tossed the Red Earl and Charlotte into the cages. Clang. The sound of the iron bars locking echoed through the room. Manager Fay watched it all with a satisfied smirk. "All right, get out of here." Manager Fay waved his hand dismissively, knowing he had to get paid. Kibben followed Manager Fay, grinning like a fool. They arrived at a lavish office, and Manager Fay pulled 380 million from the safe and handed it over to Kibben. While the manager was counting out the cash, Kibben couldn't help but glance inside the safe. It had to have hundreds of millions more, plus a couple of gold bars. His eyes gleamed with greed, but he didn't dare make a move, or even show it. "Here you go. Don't forget this month's slave quota. Don't miss a single one, or you'll be next." Manager Fay plopped down in his chair, lit a cigar, and blew out a cloud of smoke. Yes, sir. We'll deliver the quota, no problem." Kibben nodded eagerly. "All right. You're dismissed." Manager Fay waved him away. Kibben backed out slowly, then hurried out of the auction house. His 6 or 7 goons immediately mobbed him. "Boss! How much did you get this time?" that their eyes were practically sparkling. Kibben glared at the auction house and spat. Damn! That old geezer only coughed up 380 million. Why couldn't we sell him somewhere else? That he spat again for good measure. Only 380 million. That barely covers a round of drinks for us. That the goons started grumbling the second they heard the amount. Boss, didn't you tell Manager Fei that one of them was a big-shot pirate with a 100 million bounty on his head? One of them asked, *slap, star. Crap. I forgot. It's all 'cause that old dude started whining the second we walked in, made me forget all about it. Kibben smacked himself in the face. Ah. The goon shut his mouth. Forget it. We got screwed this time. Let's go grab some drinks. After that, everyone split up and find some high-value slaves. Damn it. I'm still 3 slaves short of my quota. If you don't want to end up as one of them, you better keep your eyes peeled for some good quality slaves. Kibben glared at them. Yes, sir. That they all broke out in a cold sweat. They knew their boss was serious. They all cursed under their breaths. Let's go get those drinks. Kibben grabbed the sack of cash and headed for the tavern. The Red Earl was still snoring away in his cage, his snores echoing through the quiet room. In this kind of place, people with weak hearts couldn't help but cry. Wah! And that misery was contagious. Wah! Soon the entire prison was filled with the sound of sobbing, * clang, 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 the sound of iron bars being struck. Chapter 67 The Breath of Despair. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shut up, you're crying. One more tear and I swear I'll sell you off myself. A beefy young guy in overalls roared, banging an iron rod against the bars of a cage. Hearing him, everyone who had been sobbing clamped their mouths shut, terrified into silence. The guard, looking satisfied, nodded, then he headed over to Charlotte. Charlotte was the only one in the whole place who was actually snoring, even softly. It was clearly audible in the quiet room. The guard reached Charlotte's cage. Seeing him sleeping so soundly, he couldn't help but mutter under his breath. Damn kid, how about you wake up? I'm stuck here wide awake while you're catching Z's. Clang. Clang. He smacked the iron rod against the cage, trying to rouse Charlotte, but no matter how hard he hit, Charlotte didn't budge, still snoring away. Damn it. Ignoring me, huh? Got a death wish or something? Instead of hitting the cage, the guard shoved the iron rod inside and started poking Charlotte with it. He jabbed him in the face and stomach a few times, but Charlotte didn't even flinch, just kept right on snoring. Wake up, you little punk. Stop sleeping. The guard was losing it, swinging the iron bar wildly at Charlotte, but Charlotte remained totally unresponsive. Damn you. The guard's eyes went bloodshot as he continued his assault on Charlotte. Everyone else in the warehouse watched in horror, afraid that once he was done with Charlotte, he'd turn on them. Jonah. Chief Fei's here. Get out here. A voice from outside the warehouse interrupted Jonah's torture session. Hearing that, Jonah dropped the iron rod and stomped out. Everyone else in the warehouse breathed a collective sigh of relief. As soon as Jonah was gone, the crying started up again, and the longer it went on, the louder it got. This made Charlotte, still asleep, frown slightly, like he was having a bad dream. He groaned softly. Instantly, everyone around him stared at him. They were terrified, to take that kind of beating and act like it was nothing. How could that not scare them? But Charlotte just groaned and shifted position, going right back to sleep. The Red Earl in the next cage was also sleeping soundly, though his sleeping position was a lot more refined than Charlotte's. He even managed to look aristocratic while unconscious. Those two were the only ones in the entire warehouse who weren't completely freaked out. Boss Fei, you wanted to see me? Jonah bowed and scraped as he entered Manager Fei's office, all smiles and flattery. Here. This is the list of slaves for tomorrow's auction. Get everything ready. We're talking princes, nobles, the mayor himself. Don't screw this up for me. Manager Fei handed Jonah a list, the catalog of slaves to be auctioned off the next day. Charlotte and the Red Earl were on it, but not by name. By number, They were listed as number 98 and number 99. Those numbers corresponded to the numbers on their cages. Jonah took the list carefully and looked it over. No problem. Don't worry. I'll make sure everything's taken care of. Jonah promised, trying to look eager and competent. Good. Now get out, Manager Fei said with a smile, waving him away. Yes, sir. Jonah backed out slowly. Once he was out of the office and the door was closed, Jonah let out a breath he'd been holding. He took the list and went out. He needed to check the slaves, make sure they were all still alive, from number 1 to 100. 100 slaves total. These guys were all going to the auction house, and they had to be in one piece. When he got to number 98, Jonah saw the guy who'd gotten under his skin earlier. Charlotte was still sleeping in his cage. Humph. Just wait until tomorrow, when you're someone's slave, Jonah grunted, then glanced at the next cage. He didn't bother wasting words on people like that. After checking all the slaves, Jonah walked out of the warehouse, looking pleased. The warehouse went silent again. Then the soft crying started up, from those who knew what tomorrow held. The atmosphere in the warehouse was heavy and depressing. Charlotte's sleeping face tightened in a frown, looking troubled. If Charlotte was awake, he'd realized that his ability was kicking in. He was easily influenced by strong emotions in the area. He thought he had it under control, that strong emotions would only affect him if they were coming from a single person, but as he got older, that sensitivity had faded away, and he wasn't as easily affected by personal feelings anymore. But the people in this warehouse had been suppressed for so long, and the emotions they were now releasing were more intense than he'd ever felt from any one person. Charlotte was being affected again. But because he was drunk and asleep, the effect was spilling over into his dreams. Charlotte's dream was becoming a nightmare, full of despair and wailing, making him deeply uneasy. And elsewhere, Rear Admiral Wells had finally waited for Blue to wake up and sent him back to shore. Steel Bone General, I'm sorry. I lost Charlotte, Wells said into the Den Mushy with a look of shame. In the Admiral's office at Navy headquarters, Cyborg Kong looked at the Den Mushy grimly after hearing the news. It's all right. Keep searching, but make sure you protect your own safety. Don't get close to Charlotte, just watch him from a distance, Cyborg Kong instructed. Yes, sir, Wells replied. Cyborg Kong hung up the phone. The Den Mushy went silent. Wells carefully put the Den Mushy back in his pocket. Now he needed to find Charlotte. Otherwise, he couldn't even start surveillance. Since it was supposed to be a secret, Wells couldn't ask around. He had to search street by street, but it was all for nothing. Wells even called his men together and asked if they'd seen Charlotte. They all said they hadn't. Wells had no choice but to send his men out to search as well. As for the pirates who were following Charlotte, that didn't matter at all. The most important thing was Charlotte, and so, because they couldn't make a scene, Wells and his 30-odd plainclothes Marines searched all afternoon. Night fell, and they still hadn't found him. Where could he have gone? Wells sat in front of a tea house with his subordinates, deep in thought. Chapter 68 Auction. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Your Excellency, Major General. Got word today, the Seven Waters capital is holding its monthly auction tomorrow. Think that pirate Charlotte might show up for some fun? A naval captain, dressed in plain clothes, addressed Wells. Wells considered this possibility. He'd seen the banners around town announcing the auction. Charlotte would likely want to check it out. The more he thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. Let's go to the auction house tomorrow, Wells declared, slapping the table. The sudden noise caught the attention of others nearby. Wells quickly lowered his head, pretending to sip his tea. He hadn't forgotten his mission, low-key surveillance. He needed to stay under the radar. The other officers nodded in agreement. Early the next morning, the city of Seven Waters was buzzing. Princes and nobles were everywhere, each surrounded by guards, adding to the city's excitement. Major General Wells, disguised as a nobleman, entered the auction house with his own guards. No one stopped him, which slightly embarrassed Wells. It seemed his elaborate preparations the night before were pointless. Sir, we have invitations. Show them, and no one will give us a second look, the colonel beside him said with a dismissive glance. His haughty demeanor, however, did attract the attention of several ladies, who winked in his direction. Ahem. Keep it low-key. We're here to find Charlotte. The rest is just noise, Wells whispered, observing the crowd. Yes, sir. The colonel responded quickly. Esteemed guest. This way, please. The auction is about to begin. Follow me to your booth. A suited waiter approached Wells. Wells nodded, feigning nonchalance, and followed the waiter to the auction box. A private box, huh? Wells asked his deputy suspiciously, holding up the invitation for a private room. The colonel beamed, seeing Wells' surprise. He'd spent all night securing this invitation after hearing Wells' plan to attend the auction. Once they were inside, and the waiter had left, Wells turned to the colonel, clearly expecting an explanation. I got it through a black market broker. Cost almost $1 million pele, the colonel said, pretending to be pained by the expense. Wells rolled his eyes. The Navy will reimburse you when we get back to headquarters. Then, he began scanning the crowd, never forgetting his mission, find Charlotte, but after searching for a long time, he saw no sign of her. Could it be that Charlotte didn't come after all? Wells wondered aloud, standing up in frustration. Major General, maybe we should wait a bit longer. The auction hasn't even started. Not everyone's arrived yet, the colonel suggested, also feeling a little disappointed. Wells, restraining his impatience, sat back down. Soon after, a figure descended from the ceiling on a small ladder onto the auction stage. The prearranged atmosphere team erupted into cheers as the auctioneer made his entrance. Oh. Wells ignored the commotion, his eyes darting around the auction house, still searching for Charlotte. Nothing. Ha. Welcome to our Seven Waters Capital Auction. I'm your friend, Dowdu. Let's get this show on the road. A burst of cheerful laughter filled the air, followed by enthusiastic applause. Clap. The auction house had prepared this in advance to avoid any lulls. Major General Wells, unimpressed, got to his feet. Sir. What about the boxes? Maybe Charlotte's hiding in one. The colonel exclaimed, seeing Wells about to leave. Wells paused, considering this. He supposed it was possible that Charlotte was in one of the private rooms. He forced himself to sit back down, eyeing the private boxes around the auction hall. There were only 20 in total. Wells would have to wait and see if anyone opened them up. He had no choice but to stay, even though he was itching to leave. Meanwhile, the auction had begun. The first items were jewelry and other valuables, favored by the nobles. The bidding was fierce and loud. Unbeknownst to Wells, Charlotte was still asleep in an iron cage backstage at the auction. Quick! Prepare the next items and slaves. Keep them coming. Manager Faye's voice echoed through the back, as staff hurried around carrying jewelry and leading slaves on ropes towards the auction block, backstage. So noisy. Charlotte, after sleeping all night, frowned and complained. Annoyed by the ruckus, she opened her eyes and looked around. Her voice was loud, causing everyone to stop and stare as if she were a fool. The other slaves in the iron cages looked up at her in surprise. Hey! Where am I? What's going on? My head hurts. Charlotte ignored the stares, shaking her head. She always had a headache after waking up drunk. Her movement startled the Red Earl. Hearing Charlotte's voice, he snapped awake and looked around. Unlike Charlotte, he wasn't confused. He took in his surroundings, his brow furrowing when he saw that he was in an iron cage. His face turned angry, but he restrained himself upon seeing Charlotte. What are you staring at? Get back to work. Manager Faye barked at the staff, then marched towards Charlotte, an iron rod in his hand. Well, Sleeping Beauty's awake. You were almost late for your own auction. Wouldn't want to miss that, would you? Manager Faye had a bit of a soft spot for Charlotte, since he'd brought her in himself the day before. Chapter 69 Prepare to Die. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Okay. Charlotte, still dazed, lifted her head slightly to see who was talking. Manager Faye chuckled when he saw her look up. Ha. Kid, get a good last look at the world, because you won't get another chance. With that, Manager Faye turned and left. He had work to do, no time to waste on some kid. Charlotte watched the middle-aged man walk away, speechless. Wait a minute, am I finally figuring out where I am? She wondered. What? Finally coming to, an indifferent voice cut through Charlotte's thoughts. Hearing the familiar voice, she immediately spun around. Ryder? They got you too? Charlotte exclaimed, surprised to see the Red Earl, sporting a slave collar around his neck, sat in a cage and just stared at Charlotte's excited expression, dumbfounded. Haven't you noticed our current situation? He rolled his eyes, giving Charlotte a look like she was a complete moron. Ugh, Charlotte bristled at the Red Earl's condescending gaze. Damn it! Who locked us up here? I'm gonna kill them. Charlotte slammed her fist against the iron cage. The thick steel bar at her wrist immediately bent under the force. The loud noise grabbed everyone's attention in the back area. Every eye was on Charlotte. The Red Earl facepalmed. Why did he ever bother to get involved with this idiot? Seeing all eyes on her, Charlotte immediately yelled, which lowlife dared to lock me up here? Charlotte's angry shouts echoed through the room. Everyone stared at her, dumbfounded. No one expected a slave to have the audacity to act up like this. Everyone stopped what they were doing, fixated on Charlotte. Seeing their stunned faces, Charlotte frowned slightly. Let me out, or you'll regret it. Charlotte yelled at one of the staff members, but after hearing her words, everyone exchanged glances, then erupted in laughter. Ha 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 ha. Did you hear that? He actually told me to let him go. Ha 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 ha. That's the funniest thing I've heard all year. Ha 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 ha. The staff member, still chuckling, turned to his companion. Ha 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 ha. Just ignore him, he's probably freaking out because he's about to be sold. You don't see this every day at the auction house. The staff member next to him snickered disdainfully. Let's go. We have work to do. If you slack off, Manager Fei will be all over you. The back area quieted down again. No one noticed the veins bulging on Charlotte's forehead. Gripping the iron cage tightly with both hands, she began to pull the thick steel bars apart, little by little. Watching Charlotte's efforts, the Red Earl remained silent, just observing. He wasn't worried. This little cage couldn't hold him. He was just sitting there, waiting to see the fireworks. Creek, star. Charlotte broke free from the cage and stepped out calmly. Her actions once again caught everyone's attention. Seeing Charlotte standing in the corridor, a staff member pointed at her in horror. Oh crap! He's escaped. The staff member's stammering voice echoed through the busy back area. His words seemed to trigger a reaction, and everyone turned to look at Charlotte. He's out. He's out. He's escaped. Get him. Someone, get him. The staff member shouted frantically. After seeing Charlotte, the slave escaping was bad news. Anyone who could break out of those cages was not to be trifled with. They'd worked at the auction house long enough to have seen slaves escape before, but none had ever been like Charlotte, daring to stand there and look at them defiantly. That kind of person was either an idiot or a badass, and they were betting on the latter. Quick! Call the muscle. A slave has escaped. Someone smartly yelled towards the back area's entrance. The auction house's security, who had been guarding the door, heard the commotion. They exchanged glances, but didn't rush forward. But after hearing the shout, they sprang into action. They pulled out their clubs and marched in, looking mean. A group of at least 30 to 40 guys stormed in. The staff immediately cleared the way. Everyone stepped aside, creating a wide path. The security guys immediately spotted Charlotte standing in the middle of the road and the Red Earl sitting atop the cage in his purple robe. While everyone focused on Charlotte, the Red Earl effortlessly tore apart his cage and perched on top of it. Seeing Charlotte, the lead thug raised a small, hair-trigger gun and pointed it at her. Slave, get back in your cage, or you'll die. The thug leader snarled at Charlotte. Charlotte glanced at the 30-plus thugs in front of him, didn't say a word, just looked at the Red Earl with a slight smile. Ryder, you want to save half for me? Charlotte asked the Red Earl. The Red Earl, sitting on the cage, looked at the 30-some ants in front of him, smiled disdainfully, and waved his hand. I'm not interested in swatting ants. Seeing that the Red Earl wasn't interested, Charlotte just raised her eyebrows and said nothing. Instead, she turned her ferocious smile, revealing their snow-white teeth. On the thugs, she looked insane. Tilting his neck, he didn't seem concerned about the explosive collar around his neck. "You guys ready to die?" Charlotte asked, a murderous grin spreading across her face. "Slave." Before the thug could finish speaking, a figure flashed in front of him. It was as fast as lightning. Before the leader could finish his sentence, his vision went dark, and he felt a coldness in his chest. He looked down to see an arm sticking out of his chest. "You," the leading thug tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Charlotte stood in front of the thug, smiling at the man who wanted to speak. The arm in his chest was slowly withdrawn. Bang. The thug standing in front of Charlotte slowly fell to the ground. His eyes wide, he stared at Charlotte in horror, unable to utter his final word. "Boss." Seeing their boss fall, the thug standing behind shouted, but no one dared to move forward. Chapter 70 Killing 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Charlotte ignored the blood on her right arm and face, gazing with interest at the remaining 30 thugs. "You all want to come at me?" Charlotte asked playfully, looking them over. Gulp. A chorus of throats cleared as the thugs swallowed hard. Was it even possible to punch through someone like that? They were terrified by what she'd done, frozen in place. Seeing them standing still, Charlotte shook her head slightly. "How boring. Guess I gotta invite you over." Suddenly, before she could finish her sentence, a sharp voice cut through the air. "What the hell is going on here? Where's the merchandise? Get it moving." It was Manager Fei, his voice laced with exasperation. He sounded frantic. The auction was in full swing, and the next item was delayed. As the guy in charge, he was sweating bullets. Worse, his boss was here. If he screwed this up, he was toast. His voice grew even more agitated. "Where is everyone? Are you all dead? Get the next item up here now." Manager Fei stormed into the back area. The scene that greeted him stopped him dead in his tracks. He was completely stunned. The staff stood rigidly along the walls, their faces etched with horror as they stared at someone in the corridor. He saw a person turning to face him, and another lying in a pool of blood. That side profile. Fei recognized him instantly. It was his right-hand man, the thug leader who kept order in the auction house, but now, he was lifeless in a pool of blood. Behind him, over 30 thugs stared at the person in the corridor with undisguised fear. Manager Fei's eyes landed on the figure and the recognition hit him. Wasn't that the slave who'd just woken up? How had he escaped? And wasn't the other guy, the one sitting in the cage with him, already sold? What the hell was going on? He didn't understand the specifics, but this 10-year veteran of the auction house instantly grasped the situation. "Quick! Get that escaped slave back here." Manager Fei yelled at the thugs. Charlotte smiled slightly. Instead of attacking, she eyed Manager Fei with amusement. The thugs, though, were frozen solid. Not a single one dared to move. They were all still reeling from Charlotte's earlier display of power. Seeing their inaction, Manager Fei lost it. "What are you waiting for? Grab him. Or you'll all end up as slaves yourselves." The threat hung heavy in the air, and the thugs' faces changed. They knew Manager Fei's temper. If he said it, he meant it. They'd all be enslaved. They exchanged glances, gritted their teeth, and charged toward Charlotte, weapons raised. The risk of enslavement outweighed their fear of her. They were auction house thugs. They knew what happened to slaves. Life was worse than death, and with over 30 of them, how hard could it be to take down one kid? Seeing them finally move, Manager Fei smirked, satisfied. Then, ignoring the scene, he addressed the staff lining the walls. "Why are you all standing around? Get the next item up for auction. You'll regret it if you're late." He didn't even glance at Charlotte. He figured a group of thugs that size could easily handle the escaped slave. Bang. 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 Fei smiled at the sound of the blows, turned, and headed back to the auction house. He couldn't stay away too long. Meanwhile, Charlotte stood facing the charging thugs. She saw their weapons, and felt nothing but disdain. With a burst of speed, she was among them. Each strike was merciless. one kick, one punch, and each one landed with deadly accuracy. Bang, bang bang, bang bang bang, bodies flew through the air, crashing against the walls, some even impacting the iron slave cages. Manager Fei hadn't seen it, but everyone else was staring, dumbstruck, even the enslaved. People imprisoned in the cages gazed at Charlotte, their eyes lit with a sudden spark. They saw hope in her, the hope of life. The hope of freedom. Charlotte, towering above the chaos, grabbed one of the thugs by the head, her eyes sweeping over the room with arrogant dominance. Click, with a brutal twist, she crushed his skull. The thug was dead instantly, his blood spilling onto the floor. Two thugs remained standing. They still clutched their weapons, but they were trembling, their eyes wide with terror as they stared at Charlotte. She had taken down over 30 of them in mere moments. Charlotte dropped the corpse, stalked toward the remaining two, and looked down at them with a cruel smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Then she grabbed them each by the neck, with a swift, brutal twist. Click, their necks snapped. Seeing Manager Fei still walking away, oblivious, Charlotte grinned. She hoisted the two corpses and hurled them in his direction. The bodies flew past him. Bang. Bang, Manager Fei felt two sudden gusts of wind at his side. His slightly squinted eyes snapped wide open. He thought he'd seen two people fly past him. Then, a deafening crash scared him half to death. Everyone in the auction house heard it. On stage, Dowdu heard the commotion from the back. His heart sank, but he forced a charming smile. 38 million Bailey. Any higher bids? This pearl is made of the finest materials from the East China Sea. It's priceless. He raised the red cloth, revealing a jewel that glittered under the lights, but the crowd was cold. The noise had snapped them out of their frenzy. An East China Sea pearl was still just a pearl, and 38 million was already pushing it. Seeing their silence, Dowdu cursed inwardly. Who the hell made that noise? In his private room, Wells frowned. What was that sound? He had a bad feeling, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Backstage, Manager Fei stared at Charlotte, sweat beading on his face.